again, loads of different questions on regulations that have come through and how we're going to enforce this, police this, make this happen, and at the pace that we need it to. Mark Carney, panelist, Mark Carney is tasked with, in his new role, with driving mandatory TCFD leading up to COP26 next November. And, you know, according to Doug's presentation and, you know, a lot of what I've heard from you all today, the UK is underperforming compared to other G20 nations. What one action would you take to make London and the UK the global leaders in TCFD adoption? And if you can touch on regulation, if that does feature in your thinking on the way through, that would be fantastic. Can I start with you, Ed?
I was hoping to go last, so I could have that. I was just extracting some notes. If someone could go before me, I can come back with my comment.
Martina, could you step in?
Sure. I would just say what I highlighted earlier in the context of walking the walk, leading by example, and this is a tone from the top, literally, and obviously we need commitment from a policy and government perspective and clear, consistent messaging around material issues and how they actually will then be executed upon. And what I think is important, that we are not just always pointing the fingers at the corporations. There's more work to be done collectively to look beyond and across the wider investment value chain to actually address these issues. And it probably would help to then create the means alongside this collective spirit and the tools to provide comparability, consistency, quality of information, and how this is actually monitored. And if this is a question not really for the UK government, if this is a question more collectively for the investment value chain, how we can support the TCFD recommendations, then this is something we could hopefully bring up towards COP26 and make sure that this is actually a commitment then from a top-down perspective that we all can align with and towards too.
Andrew, how are we going to do this?
Yeah, what would Mark Carney do? We all need that T-shirt, right? You asked for one. I mean, I gave you 150,000 for three. I'm going to give you three for one, I think, this time. I mean, the first one is the easy one, but maybe the most important, which is just keep doing what you're doing, right? I mean, we've all said that this is getting better. And speaking from my other life of enterprises where we're preparing this stuff, the last thing you want is now, you know, a major change or a change in direction or whatever. This is bearing fruit. It is getting traction with investors. I think Larry Fink's letter in January, which I think Doug had on his slide one, I think that is going to be a real milestone that they're saying this is going to affect the way we do investment allocation. So stick with it and keep pushing it. I think the investors, I think is more powerful and more immediate than regulation, I have to say. I worry about a time scale of regulation, and I wonder about the complication and regulatory legal risk that brings in, but I'll leave others to comment on that. The second thing I would say, and I absolutely agree with Rodney, this does need to be broadened. This does need to encompass social and biodiversity. We've not spoken about those, but they're absolutely got to be on the agenda here. And then the third one, I mean, really back to where I started, I think that the big opportunity now is to find a way, I mean, and maybe it's through TCFD, of just as that is engaging and affecting investor preference and investor action, can we engage consumer preference? Can we change the way that people buy and where they spend their money with companies? Because I think that is an even more powerful and an even quicker lever on what a company does than their investors. If we can give consumers really sensible, robust information about the carbon footprint of their spending and which companies can help them reduce that carbon footprint, I think that will be a huge step forward.
Thanks, Andrew. Amy.
So I think I'd echo what Andrew said, which is there's a lot about just keeping going here. I think in our barometer, we saw that the UK firms were doing quite well in governance, but there was lots of work to do in strategy, metrics and targets. So at least we know it's starting to be on the radar of leadership. I think the really important thing is to set bold ambitions and make them quantifiable, as we've all talked about that being really lacking at the moment. And the recent wave of net zero ambitions is really great to see, but we need companies to be able to demonstrate a clear understanding of what that means for their business and understand that in the short, medium and long term. And I think if we can get to that, and that moves the dial quite quickly.
Thanks, Amy. Rodney, what would Mark Carney do?
Well, Mark Carney's already indicated in the 12th of October last year at the TCFD summit in Tokyo that he expects to see this regulated within the next 2 years, and I therefore hope that that is what happens. I agree with Andrew and others that it would be great if consumerism or, the moral compass that executives suddenly develop overnight drives us in the right direction. I fear that the speed with which we need to act will not be fast enough if we rely on this being something that we hope people will do. I think the climate emergency is such an issue that politicians need to really do what they should be doing, which is focusing on the next generation and not on the next election, and that they put in place appropriate measures to require companies to acknowledge they have an impact and dependency on the climate and other ESG considerations, and that is transparent in its external disclosure. And I would also go as far as to say the accounting profession, and particularly the role of the statutory auditor, evolves to ensure that the concept of going concern includes whether or not the company is taking this agenda seriously, and whether or not they see that somewhere in the future there is a potential crisis through inaction to address both the climate emergency and other ESG considerations.
I do hope Mark and his team are listening again, because there's some really good insights coming out of this group today, and the chat and the website is really reflecting this. Now, last but absolutely definitely not least, Ed, it's your turn.
Well, I was just going to wrap it up by saying all of the above. I totally in agreement. No, big takeaway for me is looking at the social side of that, but really interested to hear what Andrew and Rodney made around the kind of consumerism and how we can potentially change attitudes and behaviours. So I think I'll leave it on that note.
Well, thank you all, and thank you for indulging me with an